Here we're going to show a product, and then I'm going to show how you could improve that software. This is a product called Playbook, which is a kind of a graphics management tool for artists and creatives. And on the left-hand side, you're seeing a list of the files, and then we're resizing the window. And you can see there's a problem with the left-hand side. As the screen gets narrower, it's not adjusting its size, and there's no way to move it. So you want to be able to change the width of that. So you want a draggable divider, and we'll show you how you build that kind of a thing in Beads. It's tricky because the web browser draws the scroll bar after it's done drawing your stuff. So you have to kind of do some tricks to get it in the right order so that you can draw on top of a scroll bar. Another part of the product that is interesting is to improve, which is how to make it offer a dark mode. You want to be able to switch your color table for your product. We'll show you how to do that in Discus. Another area of improvement is how do you do pop-up dialogues, and what's the best way to do that? And in this case, we're going to dim the background with an overlay of a certain percentage so that the background is slightly dimmed so you can tell it's no longer active, and then you're going to draw the dialog box on top of that. Here we're looking at some code that draws the left-hand side of the outline. We fill the background with the standard color that we want for the sidebar, and then we skip 11 points, which is our kind of left indent, and then we have 10 units of space, which is basically the whole rest of the screen for the outline. It's not really the rest of the screen, it's the rest of the sub-window. And then we're doing, on top of this, we're drawing a layer, which is our thumb. And that's the divider thumb, which is going to go on top of the scroll bar, and that is going to be 24 points high and 17 points wide. And we know that the scroll bar is like 15 points, so it's going to stick out 1 point on either side. And that is what the user is going to drag to move the divider. The D Home Outline 2 code is the one that draws the actual outline text, which is in that left-hand side of the screen. And right now it's hard-coded. So we say all media people, Ekbart Vanderklunk, and then we draw some more strings. So that's what's in the divider. That's the content of the divider. And that's a scrolling list. So the web browser is going to draw the scroll bar, but this block above is going to superimpose the thumb on top of the scroll bar in the middle of it. And that way the user can drag it. Now I'm going to show you the tracking code for the thumb. In this tracking code, the drawing of it is just a rectangular fill with some kind of gray color and then 2 vertical lines. That's nothing exciting about that. It's the tracking code that's more interesting. When the drag begin event comes in, we're going to remember where we started the drag. So we save a few things in transient variables. These are not going to be tracked in terms of undo history. These are transient, and that's why I put a T in front of the name. Then as the drag move events come in, I'm going to calculate the new position relative to the previous where we started and determine how much it moved. And then I'm going to clamp it because I don't want the sidebar to get too narrow or too large. So I'm going to clamp it in terms of how small, and I'm going to keep it in a certain range. And then if it has gone past the upper limit, I'm going to make a thud sound, a bonk sound, so that the user knows they've gone too far. And I'm only going to do that bonking sound one time, because one of the things that happens in the event systems is you can get 2 move events in a row because the operating system was busy, and when you get those 2 events in a row, if you said a thud sound on the first one, you don't want to send another thud sound because the user hasn't had time to respond. So you want them to move to the left. If they've gone too far to the right, you want them to move to the left before you make the thud sound again, because you might get 3 thud sounds in a row as you're overshooting. Another thing worth noticing is that when the drag ends, we're going to save the divider width as a preference on the hard drive of the user. Now, you know, inside a browser, there's a couple ways to store things, but if you're just storing a few hundred bytes of data, which we are in this case, we can just use a cookie, and you can have a cookie last 10 years if you want. It's a cute way of making a preferences file. You could have also loaded it into an IndexedDB database, but a cookie is fine, and it's only one line of code to save the cookie. Now let's talk about how you implement color tables so you can skin your product and have a dark and a light mode, or however many modes you want. You could easily make it user definable and give people a color picker and let them make their own color sets up. The people enjoy that, have a lot of fun making color palettes for products. It's one way to get your users involved in improving your product. They might come up with a better color scheme than you can think of. Anyway, what you do is you define a color set, and we're just basically making a record, and we use the C underscore prefix to mean it's a color, and then we just give it some kind of names, and right now we have about 14 different names of kinds of colors we use. The dead, which is the dead space, you know, the general background color, then the text for reading, and then what's the input field background, and what color do you want to have for faint text, and what should the divider be, and then the button background, and the button background when it's highlighted, and maybe what's the border around the button, and what's the text inside the button. So buttons typically have at least 4 colors. Anyway, you come up with these names, and then you use them in the program later, and then I'll show you how they were initialized. Here's the code. You create a constant, and you're using the record literal syntax where you use braces and you name of the field and then its value. This looks very similar to how you would do it in JSON, for example. Anyway, you create two different records, constants, one for the light colors, one for the dark, and then we'll just swap in this set of colors into our color table that we use inside the code. So it's very easy, and you could have made this an array. Instead of using 2 specific constants, you could have made it an array of 10 different color palettes. It's really easy to do this, and it's nice to give people the option. Younger people definitely prefer dark mode, and other people like white colors. A lot of it has to do with how big your monitor is and how dark your room is. If you're in a very dark environment and you're going to be on the screen all day long, the dark is more restful on the eyes, provided you don't go crazy and make it too low a contrast. Then you're actually creating eye strain. I've saved one of the most devious tricks for the last. When you're trying to make your product resize based on the size of the screen, what you can do is take the current bounding box height, convert it from dots to points so that it relates to the actual density of the dots. So now you have a device-independent measurement in points of how high is that box. And then you can say, I want to interpolate that, and if it's 300 points high, I want this amount of points in the final result, and if it's 1,000 points, I want it to go to this size. So you can make the top bar and the gaps automatically adjust in a linear interpolation between 2 endpoints, and you will freeze it at either end so it doesn't get too large and doesn't get too small. But depending on how big the monitor is, it will adjust really nicely. This is the ultimate in resizing technology. There's no other product that goes this far in terms of making it easy for you to make something grow and shrink. This is not a percentage-based thing. This is a linear interpolation where you give it the 2 endpoints of the 2 devices, you know, the biggest device you're planning to support and the smallest device you're planning to support, and then it will go evenly between those, and you're controlling both the gap and the content in 2 different rates. So you can have 2 different slopes on your interpolation. So these 2 lines of code are very tricky, and it yields a top bar that just seems perfect no matter how big your monitor is. Whatever you set the window size to, that top bar looks nice. And this is where you can make a AAA product in using beads by using these techniques that are facilitated by the layout model. This is really hell to do in CSS. As you can see, the window is getting bigger, taller, and shorter. And as the thing gets taller, I'm changing the size of the gap and the content. And they're actually changing at 2 different rates. And by tuning these parameters, you can make your product scale perfectly. I've just touched on a few of the interesting points in this particular project, which was to clone a commercial product called Playbook and make a copy of some of it in beads and see if it could be made better. And in my particular thing, I've changed the way they did zooming, and I've also improved how you can minimize the sidebar down to a tiny size. There's another trick in this example that I should mention, and that is if you press the Insert key on the keyboard, it will bring up the secret hidden device picker where you can then emulate different devices and imagine what it's going to look like on an iPhone or an iPad or a Kindle Fire. And that way you can quickly double check that your layouts are going to resize nicely on all those different devices. The device emulator that's built into Chrome is not very accurate. It doesn't set the DPI right. So you need to have that set. So we've written our own device emulator, and the source code is in the Playbook example. In this screen, I've just clicked the Kindle Fire 7-inch button, and now I'm emulating that device, and we can see that our product is still looking great even on a small tablet like that.